I would adore it if you could work from anywhere. I would. I think that would be amazing. But that's not the law. And my job is to help protect companies from these huge legal things. And like you said, it's not just the employee that takes the risk, it's the employer that takes the risk. And people think it's no big deal.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. This is the last episode of the month, which is the one we set aside to discuss recent HR news items. This month's a little different, though, because my guest is also the author of the news items on our agenda. Suzanne Lucas is also known as the Evil HR Lady. After a career in corporate HR, Suzanne now advises people and companies on human resources best practices. She also writes about people, leadership, and management at evilhrlady.org and for a variety of other online media sites. She also runs the Evil HR Lady Facebook group, which I highly recommend. You'll do a lot of eyeball rolling sometimes at some of the discussions there, but it is a good, healthy group of HR professionals who are trying to help each other out. So welcome back to Good Morning HR, Suzanne.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to be here.
So one of your articles on Inc.'s website this month was called "It's Time to Make Hush Trips a Fireable Offense." And as soon as I just saw the headline, I said, I know what that's about, and I know what the comments are going to sound like, right? And so it caused quite a kerfuffle. A lady on TikTok took you to task in a way that you can only do if you're an influencer on TikTok. But rather than just let it degenerate into online name calling, that whole social media mud wrestling, you engage directly and really professionally with her, and I've got to hand it to you. You organized a conversation around it, and it was definitely a TKO at the end of the day. But why don't you talk about first what you talked about and what are hush trips and what was your take on them?
Well, hush trips are when you are working remotely and your boss thinks you're working from home and you are someplace else. And to be fair, it's not a huge deal for a lot of jobs if you're going somewhere for a week or whatever that's within the country, but it can become a huge deal. And especially if you're traveling outside of the United States, especially if you are going for more than just a couple of days. And there are huge legal implications with that. And people don't actually like that at all. And it's very funny to me. I don't know, maybe funny isn't the right word. Tragic, maybe, is that people don't understand that just because they want something to be some way doesn't mean that it is. And all of these regulations around where you can work and all of the things with workers' comp and taxes and work permits, all of that are real.
Right.
They're absolutely real.
And, I've had plenty of, since 2020 especially, I've had plenty of clients who've called me and said, I need some advice. I just got a claim from the state of Colorado and we don't have any operations there, but one of my employees moved there. We laid them off and they filed unemployment in Colorado. And now Colorado's knocking on my door with penalties and back taxes and all kinds of responsibilities. And there are all kinds of things that happen. You've got, and we covered this with Catherine Clifton back in, 2021, probably on this podcast, or 2022, talking about all those things, corporate registrations in some states and workers' comp and withholding. Texas doesn't have a state income tax. We don't have state withholding. But if you're a Texas employer and you've got somebody working in another state, you may well have those responsibilities. And so the thing is, musicians and actors and other traveling performers, they've been dealing with this for years. I've got friends who are professional musicians, and when they go out of state, even for one gig, they often have to, they've got systems set up through the unions and things like that to help make sure that all gets taken care of. But they have to pay, they pay taxes in those states. And so, we love this idea of this whole, this romantic idea of being the nomad employee and I work from anywhere. But you're creating a liability probably for yourself as an employee and possibly for your employer. 23 states have immediate tax obligations. So if you go spend a day in that state, you owe taxes to that state as the employee, and the employer may have responsibilities as well. And then a whole bunch of others have, after some period of time or some amount of earning, you've got an obligation. So definitely a company, all you really said in your article was companies need to have a policy. And then like any other policy, if an employee violates the policy, you should take action, right? I mean, and they're creating a potential liability for the company. So what happened after you published it?
Well, as predicted, people didn't like it. The article went semi-viral, got about 200,000 hits, which is pretty darn good for a business article. Yeah. Most of mine do not get 200,000 hits. And a lot of the feedback was very negative, a lot of attacks on me, calling me a propagandist and a corporate shill and who's paying her to do this. I'm like, I wish someone was bribing me. Nobody bribes me. If I'm going to be accused of it, I might as well commit the crime, right? Nobody bribes me. And very little recognition that I was actually right. And actually that was the funny thing of the woman who did the TikTok. Her name is Robyn Garrett. That we had a I guess like a webinar with her to discuss this. You can watch it on HRLearns.com if you want to go back and watch it.
And I'm going to include that link in the show notes, everybody, so you can go watch that webinar too.
Amazing. She starts out her TikTok by saying, this is propaganda. It's so terrible, blah, blah, blah. But there's one thing that she gets right, and that this is legal. And I'm like, that's the whole point of it. If I had to pick a political affiliation, the closest thing that I would align with is libertarian. Like, I would
That's why we get
adore it. I would adore it if you could work from anywhere. I would. I think that would be amazing. But that's not the law. And my job is to help protect companies from these huge legal things. And like you said, it's not just the employee that takes the risk, it's the employer that takes the risk. And people think it's no big deal. And I'm an American, and I sit here in Switzerland. I'm legal to work here. I'm legal to work in the US. All my ducks are in a row, but I run an expat board, and the questions we get all the time from people that are like, oh, I want to move to Switzerland. I work remotely, so it's no big deal. And I always burst their little bubbles, and I'm like, no, you can't. Switzerland doesn't have a visa for that. There are countries with freelance visas, but again, you have to be a freelancer. You can't be an employee of your company. Does your boss know? Oh, my boss says I can work from anywhere. No, your boss does not say that. Your boss actually, maybe your direct manager said that, but they don't mean it because they don't think you're stupid enough to pack up and move to another country. They mean you can work in Kentucky or you can work in Louisiana because your company is already registered there. They don't mean you can pack up and move to Switzerland. You can pack up and move to Bali or whatever. They don't mean that because those countries, they don't want you there.
Right. International, there are places where the U.S., there are internationally countries that we have, double taxation agreements where if they tax you, we'll give you a tax credit when you report your income here. But a lot of them require some sort of registration when you get there. I have a friend who's a professional trainer and consultant in the sales area. And she had a client in Canada who she'd been working with cross-border for a long time. They invited her up to speak to their employees. She didn't think much about it. Got stopped at at the border. And why are you coming in? Oh, I've got this lovely client here. I get to spend some time with their team, and I'm so excited. No, and they kicked her out of Canada, and she got and it was a long process to get even readmitted, so she could even get back ever to Canada.
Right.
And so if you do that to your employer, yeah, your employer is going to be ticked off. And I think there are a lot of employers who are even clueless about that. A lot of small to medium-sized employers haven't even considered it still, even 4 years after we all, have started experimenting with this remote stuff. But, we told all our employees, you can work anywhere in Texas. It's a big state. But I lost 2 employees when we went remote because they had, reasons to move out of state, and they thought, well, yeah, I can do that. And I said, no, sorry, you can't, because I'm not going to register in California to become a California employer for sure, or in the other case, Oklahoma, which is right next door. The only reason Texas doesn't fall in the Gulf of Mexico is because Oklahoma sucks so hard. But the reality is we. That's for my producer Rob, who's at Texas A&M. I'm usually ragging on the Aggies. So, but I'm not going to become a multi-state employer for just one employee. And most employers don't want to do that. So, I thought the thing was interesting when I saw that Robyn Garrett's TikTok. I kind of looked her up to see what the story is. And really, she's not an HR person. Her whole career is marketing, and she's so good at marketing. I mean, she's got a giant TikTok following and all of this, and she's got a program which is focused on leadership skills for young professionals and doing that, which is honorable work. She's got a book called Happy at Work, which that's a whole nother episode. We could do an episode about this whole happiness at work movement that's really blown up in the last couple of years. You've still got to make money. You've still got to follow the laws. You still got to do a lot of the things. I mean, you can be happy at work, have a great culture, great environment, but so many of the books just focus in those talks, just focus on that part of engagement and not actually engagement to actually accomplish the point of the whole company. And so she's got all this, and I thought, well, it's interesting. Then it kind of blew up, and then you did the really honorable thing, I thought, and invited her onto that HRLearns platform to have that conversation between you and she. And like I said, I think that was a technical knockout. I mean, she acknowledges at the beginning of her TikTok, oh yeah, this is what the law is. But I think it's kind of one of those things where as long as nobody catches us or everybody's happy with it, and there's that happy word, it's not a problem. And that's probably true. Right up to the point that somebody's not happy or something happens. And then the employer's left holding the bag.
Exactly. And that's the thing is that it works fine until it doesn't. And as you said, until someone's not happy. Like when you have someone who moves to another state, doesn't mention because, you've said you can only work in Texas. Well, it's not like Mike is showing up to my house. So how does he know that I'm not in? And then you get injured or you get laid off or whatever, and you're filing for unemployment from the wrong state. And then there's suddenly all sorts of rules. And you mentioned California. I would rather stick pins in my eyes than practice HR in California.
Or New York City, for that matter. Right.
Or New York City. There are so many specific rules there. And maybe I would like it because I do like a challenge. But there's no way that Texas law that you're following matches up with California law. And you're the one in big trouble. California is never, ever, ever going to say, oh, well, that's all on the employee's head. You didn't know about it. They will come after you. And that's just how it is. Someone shared on the Evil HR Lady Facebook group that they had an employee who was overseas somewhere and had an accident while working, tripped over something that you're like, oh, that'll never happen. But it happens. And their workers' comp carrier wouldn't cover it. And the guy's health insurance wouldn't cover it because they're like, you were at work, that's workers' comp. and workers' comp wouldn't cover it because they didn't have coverage in that company, and they got sued, and the company had to pay out over $1 million.
Jeez.
Like, that is a serious thing. And for a small business, that is absolute bankruptcy. If you sued me for $1 million, well, that would be the end of my business.
Right.
Like, it would be the end of my business. I don't have $1 million in insurance coverage. I should probably up my insurance coverage now that I think about it, because I don't have $1 million. But now I'm concerned as to what my levels are. I need to check. Anyway, I'll do that later. Okay. But yeah, it would bankrupt me.
Right.
It would bankrupt a lot of small businesses.
Yeah, it would hurt. It just create a giant hassle. Even if it wasn't $1 million judgment, just having to deal with suddenly, whether unintentionally and through no fault of my own as an employer, I now have obligations to this other state or, God forbid, this other country. And then you've got things like GDPR and, the data privacy rules and stuff. And so what kind of data are we sending over to, Europe or the UK or the EU or the UK, or, I've got a son in Norway who works legally there. But working, you're sending data back, and you maybe have privacy. It may not be even stuff that you're concerned about as your company privacy data, but just transferring the data back over, talking about just basic details about a customer in the EU. GDPR may be implicated. So you've got all these things. And so there's a reason that you want to have a plan as an employer if you're going to do this. And you want your employees to stick with it.
Absolutely. And this is why I was so harsh saying this should be a fireable offense, because it's like they say with parking tickets, that a parking ticket is simply the high cost of renting that space.
Right.
And so if you're wealthy, a $50 parking ticket is worth it for you. I'm going to park right here, and which is why, it's that same kind of concept. So if I'm not going to be fired, then the worst thing that'll happen is my boss will be like, Suzanne, don't you ever do that again. And I'll go, okay, I'm sorry.
And then you'll do it next time you want to take a trip.
Yeah. Right. And I'll get a write-up.
Right.
No, this is serious business. And, as I said, I would love it if you could work everywhere, but I do want to throw a caution in with that, is that the more you try to convince your boss that you can work from anywhere, the more your boss is going to believe you. And we already see this. The Wall Street Journal had an article a few weeks ago about how a lot of American companies are outsourcing to the UK. Salaries are considerably lower in the UK than in a lot of US areas, and they speak English. So, if you can convince me that time zones don't matter and I can be just as productive, well, then your boss might start to believe you. And why should I pay you your expensive American salary when I can hire someone else for a lot cheaper elsewhere? And we're seeing that. And then people are upset about that. How dare you outsource? Well, how dare you spend all this time and effort trying to convince your boss it doesn't matter where you are?
Exactly. And, if you want people in the same time zone, there are Mexico-based PEOs that hire college graduate English speakers who you can, just basically you're engaging with the PEO just like you would any other PEO, and they're leasing that employee back to you. They're handling all the tax obligations and everything, and they work, for somewhat, their labor market doesn't cost nearly what the U.S. does. And so,
right.
And so we've got to we got to remember that. Well, I think we'll include all the links to the article and the TikTok and the webinar in the show notes. I think you handled it very gracefully, evil HR lady. So that was really well done.
Thank you. I do believe in dialogue.
Yeah. Oh, I think that, and I think we need a lot more of that. And I think that's a good thing about, one of the things I really love about the Evil HR Lady Facebook group is you and the other administrators make people play nice.
Yes.
And sometimes that human instinct to dogpile somebody who asks a question that you think is a dumb question, and some folks just have that tendency to want to jump on and put people in their place or something. Y'all always clean, you cut those things short pretty quick, and it's a pretty respectful group. So it's reflective of that. Yeah.
We work really hard at that. And what people don't know behind the scenes, the mod team, we discuss a ton of stuff. And also we have wildly different views.
Oh yeah, I can tell that too.
On
Yeah.
a lot of things, but we respect each other and we allow you to have different views. I don't care what your opinion is, but you're going to be nice about it.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. For many employers, any review of a candidate's social media profile is taboo. That is a privacy line they are simply unwilling to cross. But within the confines of Title VII and other anti-discrimination laws, a candidate's off-duty conduct, including how they conduct themselves on social media, may be relevant. For example, if the employee engages in illegal or negligent conduct on the job that might have been predictable and therefore preventable, had the employer simply reviewed the publicly available information about them on the internet, the plaintiff's lawyers will certainly be using that information in a negligent hiring suit. For some positions, threatening, coercive, or bigoted online behavior may be a legitimate concern. In other instances, references to personal drug use or criminal behavior may be relevant. Imperative helps clients conduct necessary online due diligence while building guardrails around the process to ensure that irrelevant or potentially discriminatory information isn't provided to decision makers. You can learn more about the many ways Imperative helps our clients make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 150 and enter the keyword kerfuffle. That's KERFUFFLE. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Suzanne Lucas, the evil HR lady. So now let's you and I cross swords a little bit. You had an article in Inc. called Do Reference Checks Really Matter? And so Graham Duncan, who basically, he's an investor and he runs a multifamily office, wealth management for crazy rich people, where almost every hire is just very high risk for them. And they tend to have small staffs. They don't have giant staffs generally. And we work with a lot of those, we work with really risk-averse clients a lot, and we work with a lot of family offices. But he gave an interview where he basically said that you can find out more about a person by asking someone else than by asking the candidate. And then you wrote that this tells me he assumes that candidates lie and that references tell the truth. This is a pretty ridiculous assumption. While some candidates may lie about their skills, some hiring managers may also lie about the job. It's a perfect match. And I think there's probably some hyperbole here. If he's hiring a mainline, just staff admin support position, he's not doing this. But he talks about doing 45-minute reference interviews, really digging deep. And in full honesty, for some of our clients, we do something similar to that. If the person can give us that much time, it's not always the case that they will or can. But I think there is a balance. And you touch on it, you approach it, but you quoted somebody who has said, I think, that you never get a bad reference. And that's just simply that we get bad references, and we get honest, accurate bad references from time to time. And I know other employers too. So tell me what your beef is with reference checks.
Well, I think it's very important that we understand that the guy who said this, as you said, he does family. His website was generational wealth management for a select group of families.
Right.
So that is very, very different than I'm an asphalt company and I'm going to spread asphalt on your driveway, right? It's a very, very, very different thing. And for him, and I said this in the article, I'm sure this works for him.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is in talking about it, and the guy who posted it on LinkedIn doesn't mention what this guy does. It just is like, here is this advice for everybody. I can guarantee that generational wealth management has a teeny, teeny, tiny, tiny, tiny group of people that do this. And they all know each other, and there's going to be that. And you're not getting into that field. No one's going to hire me to do that
Right.
because I don't have any connections and I don't have any familial wealth management. But if someone would like to give me wealth,
Yeah, you could
I would be
practice,
happy
right?
to.
Yeah.
I could practice it. I think that would be a growth experience for me. So my problem, I'm not opposed to references in general. I'm opposed to a 45-minute reference. And I'll tell you right now, if somebody called me to ask for a reference for somebody and they're like, I want to talk to you for 45 minutes, I would be like, no. And I would also be texting the person right at that moment who I was giving the reference for, saying, run from this. These people are psychotic. But I don't also have anybody that's worked for me that's going to be working for a small familial wealth management either. So the first problem is for the most part, you're not going to get people to talk for 45 minutes. The other thing is a lot of companies have policies that prohibit managers from giving references at all. HR will verify titles, start and end dates. Used to be more on the salary side. A lot of states now have real rules around salary that they don't want to do that. Some people will say, was it a voluntary term or involuntary? Some will say, is there rehireable or not? But that's all you're getting from some companies. Now, managers, as you know, will disregard company policies a lot. But this is one of the things that drives me nuts. And I've heard recruiters say this all the time. If they don't give you a reference, then it means that they were a bad
No.
employee. No, it doesn't. It means that the manager is following the rules.
Right. Yeah. That's for sure. We always, even on an employment verification, if it's, we're talking straight to payroll or the HR department or whomever, we always have a series of questions that we have. Was there ever any reason to question their integrity or honesty? Did they ever act in a threatening or coercive manner? All these kind of questions. And 80% of the time, employers refuse to answer previous employers. And that's fine, because I now have documented that I asked that question, though, so that
Right.
if this employee turns out to be a knucklehead and somebody's injured or there's a theft or a loss and we're in litigation now with a customer or a member of the public or whomever, and they say, well, they did this at the previous employer as well, and they try to hit me with a negligent hiring suit, I can go back and say, well, look, I asked these questions. I, as the employer, we asked these questions, and the previous employer refused to answer. So we did our due diligence. Right. And so, even if you, and I see it had the comment on the Evil HR Facebook group a lot that people say they don't even check references. They don't even do employment verifications. And it just kind of makes my head go crazy, because even if you only verify dates, we see more people lying about actual employment someplace, whether they even work there or not, or their dates of employment, significantly lying about them, and titles. We see that more than we see people lying about their criminal history. And so in the gospel according to Coffey, rule number one is if they lied to you coming in the door, it's not reasonable to expect their behavior to change after you hire them. Absolutely. And so if they fudged their title to make it look like they were a higher level or had other experience, or they added 6 months to their termination date to kind of cover that gap in employment, they just lied to you. And so definitely doing the verifications and asking those questions. And there's value for certain roles, especially when you talk about technical competencies. I'm a competencies first person anyway. I think you should do everything you can in the application and interview process to measure competencies before you even get to where you're doing references. And I think we should, I'm big on moving away from the longstanding credentials that we've used forever, like college degrees and things like that. What have you done in the last 5 years that's really relevant? What have, show me what you've grown, where you've grown, what skills you can demonstrate to me right now. I think we're going to move more and more as a society towards that, because that computer science degree you got 10 years ago is probably not as relevant if you haven't been using it for the last 10 years.
I absolutely agree. And I think about like my degrees. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in political science. I haven't touched political science since I graduated in 1998. On paper, I have this master's degree in this area. I don't have a degree in human resources. But what am I an expert in?
Right.
So I always say it's ridiculous that we consider the years between 18 and 22 to be the most important thing in your entire life, right? I have no regrets for going to college, graduate school, a little bit of regrets, but there was a really great burrito place, so it kind of balances out.
Yeah, we had a great Popeyes fried chicken right around the corner from us in college, and it covers a multitude of sins.
See, there's some very, very good things about higher education, but yeah, that type of thing, though, I agree with you. I fully agree on background checks, and I tried to distinguish. Did I try to distinguish in that article? I write so many articles between a background check, I did little air quotes for those of you listening, and a reference check. Because background checks, I absolutely 100% think you should do that. Did you work for this company? Do you have the degrees that you say you do? Do you? The job title thing is always funny to me, because companies go through this, especially in HR. They'll come up with these stupid titles. For a while, my title was, you ready for it? Functional lead HR transition.
Okay.
Tell me what I did.
Who knows, right? Yeah. I was once.
Yeah, like it was a stupid title. And then somebody realized it was stupid, and it got changed to labor and employment law consultant.
Oh, wow.
Which that gives you a different thing. I did the same job.
Right. And probably
it was just a different.
Yeah. And I was once HR process and reporting management. And,
right.
Yeah, and so how does that translate to what another organization calls it doesn't. So that's why the competencies are really important. And you're talking about what you did. And that's why I think references are good when you can talk to that previous manager, if only you're verifying what the applicants made claims about what they did. I mean, because we've talked to previous managers, supervisors who said, oh, this person told us that they were on this, they led this committee that saved all this, they improved this process and saved all this money. And then the manager comes back and says, they were an intern. And if they were even in those meetings, they were taking notes. And so this person had, clearly expanded their role and scope of authority.
Right.
But even there, you take that reference information and you go back and have a follow-up conversation with that applicant about it. I wouldn't ever suggest that an employer take some negative feedback from a previous employer without getting the applicant's side. Now, hopefully, while you're doing the interview, you've asked questions about what were your challenges at this employer, why, and you're asking why they left and things like that. And I think it's a fair question to say, when we call this former supervisor, and I think it's always important to tell them you're going to, because it elicits more honesty from the applicant. If that applicant knows you're going to call, maybe they're not going to be quite so prone to fudge, and they'll be more honest about whatever the circumstances were. But ask them what they're going to say. And they may tell you, look, sometimes two people get to work together and they just can't come to an agreement on how things are done. And for whatever reason, two different personalities just don't work. And this was the case. And she was the boss and I was the employee in that circumstance. And it was, I'm the one who had to leave the organization in order to resolve that circumstance. If an employee tells me that, and then I go talk to that former supervisor, and that supervisor throws the employee under the bus, and it's mostly personality stuff, I've got faith in the employee now, right? They were honest. They were the professional ones, and they're going to get some credence from me. Whereas this person who just throws the former employee without any, now if they say, like, they were never on time. If it's important in your organization to be at their desk at a certain time every day, you need to have that conversation with them about that, because that was a challenge here consistently. And maybe that's feedback I take back to that employee, that applicant, and have a frank conversation about, and document it so that when it comes around and here they are in week 3 and they've been late 15 times, we've got some documentation that this was important and this is why we're talking about it.
Absolutely. I am a big fan of that kind of thing. I'm just not a big fan of the 45-minute reference check, and of not recognizing that a lot of managers just won't
do it. Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
They just won't. And they won't answer those basic questions either. And I definitely don't want anybody holding that against the candidate.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And some people do. They do.
And we were going to talk about your article on bias in AI and in recruiting, but we're out of time. So I'm going to include a link to that article and also do a pitch. This is we're recording this, pulling back the curtain on Monday, Memorial Day, and for release on Thursday. This week, I'm speaking to the Texas Association of Community College HR Professionals Conference down in Galveston about AI and ethical issues around AI. And then next week,
fun!
Dallas HR and I and forgive me, another panelist. We've got a 2-hour AI presentation webinar at dallashr.org. You can register for that as well on AI. It's AI. I've got 15 topics I talk about. When somebody asks me to speak, I give them this whole list. All anybody's wanted to talk about for the last year is AI. I'm doing it over and over and over again. And the problem is I have to keep recreating the slides because it's changing so fast. And so
I know I do the same thing. I've given numerous keynotes on AI, and I always try to push my improvisational comedy as a leadership tool keynote because it's awesome. It's an awesome keynote, and I have given that one multiple times as well, but I always have to talk them out of the AI, but I do AI more than anything else too.
What they want to hear about. And it is, you need to read Suzanne's article because it is it also where you can end up in a ditch real quick if you're not careful.
Absolutely.
Well, that is all the time we have. Thanks for joining me again, Suzanne.
Thank you for having me. It was delightful.
And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.